Welcome back to the Laurence McKenna channel, where at the start of the season, I made some predictions, as did everyone else. And I literally mean everyone. Joining me to hold me accountable for some of these predictions and maybe change some of them. Jamie Slevin, welcome back.
Thanks, Laurence.
Thanks. Anyway, there are plenty of people out there who are currently adjusting them. This is a good time to do it. We've had a couple of weeks to consider things. We've looked at narrative. We've looked at whether we've got any bias. And also we've looked at whether we're just boring people who just want to come back to the norm, right?
Which often ends up being the conclusion 4 games into the season.
Right. Now, 4 games into the season, should you really be looking at this? Probably not. It's Premier League table. Most people shouldn't be looking at it until about, I'm going to say 8 to 10 games, but 8 is where you start to go, shaping up. 10 is where you start to go, oh.
At 10, you've had enough of a cross-section of the league.
Yeah.
You know, as we'll find in this video, some sides have had very easy fixtures on paper and sides have had some difficult fixtures.
Right, yeah, and I think that is definitely worth factoring in. And of the sides that we picked out to almost re-predict, I think we've kind of spanned the table quite nicely. So let's dive in at this end. Everton. I'm not against Everton staying up, but I think it's a club in flux that basically they're not unfluxed yet. Does that make sense?
Well, they had quite a clear strategy this summer, it seemed, which is we don't want to invest anything into the club because maybe we're going to sell it.
Yeah.
And the result of that has been they don't have a centre forward, at least until very, very recently. And it almost feels as if it took them 3 games to go, oh my God, we will get relegated.
Yeah.
Striker.
And the point is that, like, I mean, even if you look at this, right, like, obviously they've got Beto, but they've got quite a few injuries in there. They've had a couple of people who don't really want to be at Everton.
And the fascinating thing about Everton is they're playing Decore as the most advanced midfield player.
Yeah.
Now, Decore is a box-to-box kind of guy. He's definitely not occupying the space in between midfield and defenders.
Sure.
Then you look over to the right-hand side and you've got James Garner, who's a good footballer, but really a defensive player. He's more of a central midfielder in my mind than a wide player. And I don't know a huge amount about Groenfeld on the left, but if you look at the bench and who they can bring on, Dwight McNeil is a midfielder rather than a winger.
Yeah, there's really just not enough. I'd say what they're trying to do is fit a couple of square pegs into round holes, although with Sean Dyche, that's kind of what you get in the first place. I feel like the players probably look at him and go, we were sold on this idea, we were an aspiring team, and now we're very clearly a team that is purely trying to stay up, purely get away from the relegation zone.
And it's a dark retrospective interpretation of appointing Sean Dyche. Because it could have been, well, like he's a great manager, but now it's like, who's going to keep us up on a budget? And was that the criteria?
But then real question around with this. So if you are looking to sell your team in the first place, you have to do it within a certain period. Otherwise, you're screwed. But if you don't sell them, what do you do? Like, because they will be much harder to sell as a championship club than as a Premier League club.
And by that metric, it's interesting they haven't said, look, 100 million in the transfer market well spent is guaranteed to keep Everton up.
Yeah.
Let's do it. Take the presumably 700 million from the new US investors. But what they've seemed to have done is said, look, Sean Dyche will keep us up. And they've suffered for that. They've suffered for that. And looking at the side and perhaps looking at their fixtures coming, it's going to be tough to see where the points come
from.
So
fixtures-wise, it is really difficult. I think a lot of people will look at their fixtures list and go, I don't quite see where it lets up for Everton. And that's kind of my point here, is it's like, you know, come back from the international break, Arsenal, Brentford, Villa, those are 3 really hard games. Luton Town, Bournemouth, that's probably one where you're like, right, we need to pick a couple of points there. Liverpool at home, I mean, maybe Dyche has got a plan for that, right? Maybe there's similar with West Ham where it's like, look, we can go punch for punch with those guys. On top of that, you've then got like, I mean, I can't predict where they're going to beat a Palace or something like that. I would have thought in previous years, I'd be like, Everton will get a result there. Everton will get a result here. I'm really struggling to identify any point in the season where they put a run of games together, not where it's like a draw and then a win and then a loss. Like, I struggle to see more than 2 positive results back-to-back for Everton.
And we're in this dark place for Everton fans where you look at Luton away and Sheffield United home and think, oh my God, are we going to be back to where we were? Relegation battles. And I have to say, equally darkly as far as Everton are concerned, this week here, where they host Luton Town and then host Bournemouth, feels like in October, a pivotal week in the season.
And weirdly, on top of that, they cannot now reinvest in the team even if they are bought. So you're then waiting to get to January, kind of scraping as many points together as possible, with players knowing in that period, I might be one of the players they sacrifice anyway to upgrade the squad.
And the dangerous thing is, if you look at this lineup and they lose one attacking player to injury, even one from the bench, someone like Dwight McNeil, you ask, oh my God, I mean, they have so few options.
Who is it after that? I mean, in the past, you probably would have, I mean, I know they've got some injuries. I don't feel great about their injuries, but like, you really don't see anyone coming off the bench there and going, yeah, you're going to change the game.
I mean, the fact that Garner has to play essentially as a right winger.
Sure.
Is not the job he was bought for at all.
No.
And the idea that Decore, as I mentioned before, is like the advanced midfield player. We're not talking about gaps in an attacking squad.
Right.
We're talking about an absence.
Yeah. And that's the point, is it's not like yeah, we've got something here that could feed into this. Do you think I'm all that wrong with Everton? Or do you think actually the wrong I am with Everton is actually lower?
I think you're bang on the basis that Everton may have, and I say that because of Jordan Pickford primarily, found that there will be 3 worse teams than them. I say that with caution, but I say it because Sheffield United, Burnley and Luton all look like they could be in some level of trouble.
Yeah, that's another one where you look at the Premier League table here and, Wolves probably, I mean, that's misleading with the likes of Wolves, right? Wolves have only got 3 points. That's put them, because there are 2 teams who have got 1 less win than Wolves.
Sure.
They're a little bit higher. So I don't think I'm all that far off with Wolves. Maybe I think Fulham, Forest, I did say this, I'm kind of like, I actually think there's a couple of teams you could swap around in here and you would say, well, maybe West Ham do finish high, maybe Brentford do finish high, maybe Forest do finish. All of these teams are kind of in a mulch. And I feel like Everton, the problem for Everton is they almost want to be in that mulch and they're just not, because they don't have the quality of Fulham, they don't have the quality of Forest, they don't have the quality of Palace, they don't have the quality of Burnley. There's a gulf.
And there's nothing redemptive about them. It's not like, well, they're going to struggle for goals, but how good are they defensively?
Right, okay.
And it might be that Sean Dyche gets that side.
Right.
And you're hoping for a miracle on the fitness of Dominic Calvert-Lewin. But I think at that stage, you can almost dismiss it as a possibility.
How wrong was I about Chelsea?
So this is interesting, because you've had Chelsea as 5th, and I think there's different types of 5th. Did you have them here as banging on the door of the top 4, just missing out? Or did you have them in a much of muchness between 5th and 10th?
No, so I had them in this position where I think they got to about 34 games and then fell away. And that was also partly based on the assumption that they would get another striker, so a Vlahovic or someone who was going to be like a bit of a statement signing. And basically that would have redeemed a lot of what they are currently looking at in the team, where it's like, oh yeah, they struggle for incisiveness. I looked at their heat maps in the last game versus it was Forest, where they lost a point. Yeah, they literally lost 3 points in the last game. And I was like, oh, you were just feeding it into people who were then like not making the most of their chances. If you had a deadly striker or someone who could draw a lot of that attention, what would you then do? And you're also playing a team where it's like...
Chelsea, more than any other side, always feel like they're a great striker away from that being the difference.
Yeah, completely.
So I think if you look at the Nottingham Forest game, there's nothing existential about that result. Watching it, you just think, oh God, like you're 1 player away. Jackson, we were very positive about. And I think that positive...
wrong too.
I don't think you were wrong on an individual level. He's a brilliant player and by all accounts a nice guy. But whether he's a number 9 in the shape that Chelsea need, that's becoming increasingly difficult to argue.
It would be, yeah, and also the loss of someone like Nkunku, and like there's a couple of pieces in there we go, oh, maybe he would have been a great combo with, and maybe this would have worked if, and it feels like at the moment they're kind of filling a couple of not interesting gaps, but awkward gaps. Oh, don't go to highlights. I did not want to do that because I can't play those. There's also, I actually think Raheem Sterling's fantastic. I don't have any worries around Raheem Sterling. I think a lot of people are maligning him for no reason. I think the Mudryk issue they currently have is a real problem for them. Like, I think Mudryk should have hit the ground running if he was going to go anywhere. I kind of hope that Pochettino will be a redemptive factor for him. He always needs a coach he can kind of respect, look up to, play under. I felt like that would have been great. Madueke, obviously another great player. Cole Palmer, I think that's a fascinating buy. I think it shows a lot of where they think Sterling's going to be in that kind of 10 rather than out wide. I think the same with Maatsen is I'm like, they have so much width, they have so much talent. They do just need someone to focus that around. And I'm not saying like Haaland style, but you get what I'm saying.
Yeah, and the other issue with having so many wide/10 players is Mudryk isn't going to get 5 games.
Right.
And, you look at Maatsen or Palmer and you think, could they get a run? And it's so important to get a run, especially when there's not a big centre forward who can take the pressure off you. So my only worry with their range of choices is they might actually find themselves in a position where perhaps Raheem Sterling aside, nobody actually gets 10 games in a row.
They're not actually quite a team yet who can unlock a side. They've got, I mean, Caicedo, Fernandez, all these kind of teams, all these kind of players, fantastic world-class players against Liverpool who are willing to play them. Sure, that's great. Like, you know, obviously, if we can go back to, go back there. Like, that's great, right? So the result they got against Liverpool, 1-1 draw, fine. The West Ham loss, it's quite simple to see how that happened. West Ham have done that quite a few times this season. Same with Luton, where it was like, I know they beat them 3-0, but surely that Chelsea team will be looking for more. The Wimbledon one is kind of an abomination in the first place. That you guys even should score. Well, they had to bring on big players to win that game.
The Wimbledon one's interesting because, like West Ham and like Luton, Chelsea knew exactly how Wimbledon were going to set up.
Right.
And the task was very clear. Break down 10 men behind the ball. And they didn't even look like flirting with doing so until they won a penalty.
Yeah. It was a penalty.
And you know, the West Ham game is a problem that Pochettino basically failed to solve at Tottenham. I remember going to watch Spurs play Newcastle, and this was a Steve Bruce Newcastle side, and they played a real 4-5-1 with Joe Linton up front by himself. And Pochettino couldn't break that side down, and he always has seemed happier to me, Poch, when teams throw punches at him, a little bit like Liverpool. And my fear, slightly, with the first period of the season for Chelsea, is do they have a striker? And the answer is maybe not. And do they have enough players to unlock a side?
They have a focal point, I guess would be my point. Like, can you remember famous Poch wins is when they've had a focal point within the team. Lucas Moura was one of them. Harry Kane was another one for Spurs. Like, he's always needed this kind of focal point up front that everything not goes through, but it's like, hey, there's a bit of a spark generated by that. Arguably, they lack that. Like, and I'm saying like there's talent throughout the rest of the team, but there's not a wick to the candle.
And you were a big fan of the Juventus centre forward.
Vlahovic, yeah.
And
I mean, I'm not a big fan of him, but I'd say he's good.
He would be a Chelsea player for you.
I feel like he would be, yeah. I feel like he could be like a classic, good Chelsea 9.
And, you know, the thing is, it's kind of been done to death at this stage.
Yeah.
But within Chelsea's transfer spend, for good and for bad, they haven't put 100 million aside.
So that's that's the other element there is like, there's a lot of money that's been spent and there seems to be a lot of issues addressed within the team. I'm wondering why they've not seen value in the squad. It's really weird. Which is weird, because actually then when you flip over to West Ham, and I put West Ham in 12th, I don't think I'm all that wrong on that. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't think I'm all that wrong. It's kind of weird. I feel like if they got Harry Maguire, the 2-1 against Luton is like a 5-1. The 3-1 against Chelsea is like, they just kill him. The Brighton win, you're like, Harry Maguire must be kicking himself that he didn't go to West Ham at this point, because it would not only would he be playing, he'd also be getting a goal bonus.
Oh, a goal bonus and a clean sheet bonus. Yeah. I mean, Harry Maguire, right?
By the way, they haven't get the clean sheet once this season.
But it's funny, because when you say it, it's so obvious that they are a Harry Maguire away.
Yeah. Like, that's what's weird, right?
Because they're bringing off Ogbonna.
Yeah.
And Ogbonna's a totally fine player, but he's a level or 2 levels below Harry.
And they put him on as like a Steven Corker type, where it's like, make him a striker for 20 minutes. Just see what he does.
And the other thing is, Harry Maguire would be on the end of James Ward-Prowse. But, you know, West Ham are very good at defending their box, and Harry Maguire's great at progressing the ball.
Right.
So, you know, if you look at how West Ham play in terms of ball progression, he would fit in offensively and defensively, beyond just the simple fact of being good in both boxes.
So not only that, Harry Maguire's expected to be the A side at United. He'd be the B side at West Ham.
Because they have
Aguerd. And they don't have a player at the back who is a B side. Zuma, I mean, you know, sure, he's a decent B-side, but I think Harry Maguire he makes a decent B-side. Harry Maguire in the Leicester team was a B-side. I mean, he was. Again, with Evans, all these kind of people, it's like he was always taking the instruction, should we say, from somewhere else. There's always someone who's a better centre-back in the side than Harry Maguire. And that's not a bad thing to be. Like, that's not terrible. It's just, you're just not a Manchester United.
And it's interesting too, because Ten Hag, I think, has played it perfect.
Yeah.
He said, listen, you can go, but you can maybe play if you're good enough. And he's basically said, okay, I'll be a squad player.
Yeah.
Which if you're Eric Ten Hag, thank God you don't need to bring on Johnny Evans.
And Harry Maguire.
And Harry Maguire.
I'm just saying. So, overall, I think with the James Ward-Prowse signing, I think if they'd have signed Harry Maguire, those guys would be looking at some serious P's.
The only worry I'd have before we leave West Ham is just that squad depth point.
Am I all that wrong with West Ham in terms of 12th?
The only thing that I think isn't shown in your prediction is the fact that they'll be 8th till April.
I feel like a bit of a drop-off. And also they have no European football this season, which was a huge part of why they dropped away last season. Totally understand what you're saying. Let's talk a little bit then about a team who probably will end up finishing in that 8th spot, Aston Villa. I think the early part of the season has been relatively cruel to Aston Villa. I feel like it's not been... I mean, they've only played 3 games so far, right? But I feel like... Oh, no, wait. 4, sorry. The Everton one, misleading, I personally feel. Do you not agree?
I think their whole season, if you look at their scores, they haven't really had a game that's been close. They've either been hammered or done the hammering. And I think that's a reflection of where Villa are at the moment.
Right.
They are, on the ball, very exciting. They exploit the space in behind defence very, very well.
If the space is there.
If the space is there. But when they've lost the midfield battle, that defence that looks so good on paper with Pau Torres in there now and Martinez in goal, hasn't actually played like that. And Emery has said we might need to temper our expectations just a little bit. Because despite Carlos, despite Torres, they look a little fragile. And it's strange because if you look at Douglas Luiz and Kamara, they should have more steel than they do.
It's kind of weird because I totally get what you're saying. I feel like what's strange about this team is previously when they played with, say, whoever, you had Gerrard, but then you had managers before that, you would have thought McGinn might be a bit more of he was a bit more of a focus player. Douglas Luiz, someone who was a bit more prominent. Ollie Watkins, someone who's extremely prominent. Like, they had players within that side where you basically go, you are what we're building around. And I feel like because they've shifted the emphasis in the side, at the moment, they don't have enough consistent go-to systems and guys to win a game. It's basically like, it's not a repeatable format in the way that you need it to be in the Premier League.
No, and the fact that they're either being battered or winning games heavily is probably because of the fullbacks. I mean, here they had Matty Cash as a right midfielder. He wasn't. This was a 3 at the back in a 5.
Yeah.
And the point being, their wingers, their fullbacks get so high up the pitch that they are very exposed on the counter. And there's little hints of Burnley here. So Burnley play a certain way, which in the Championship, they got 90-odd points. But when it doesn't quite work and you're not quite precise, you can lose games heavily.
It like that, yeah.
And I think Villa are just at the moment a level below the quality required to avoid this swing of winning games heavily and losing games heavily.
So I was incredibly wrong about 6th is what you're saying.
Yeah, I think 6th was the sexy pre-season...
Yeah. It was the
August sun version of Aston Villa.
Yeah, it was the team that beat...
Lazio.
Yeah.
And dismantled Lazio, in fact.
Yeah. Valencia. All those. Yeah.
I would say this is a new footballing phenomena though, where if you're a little bit wrong on your press or a little bit wrong with your positioning, you can lose games heavily.
Massively, especially if you don't have the right people in those positions who can individually one-on-one you. Yeah.
Aston Villa against Liverpool. Liverpool lost the game. I think it was 7-2 or something. They weren't terrible.
Yeah,
they were 5 yards off, and that's all it takes.
Right, and you can disorientate Villa quite easily, I think.
Whereas West Ham United aren't playing the percentages in the same way. They're sitting there and going,
we're going to have 26% possession and we're totally fine with that. And every now and again, we throw snake eyes. If that's a good thing, I don't know if that's a good thing or not. Let's talk a little bit about Newcastle then, because I put Newcastle in 7th position. Now, maybe you could just swap Villa and Newcastle, maybe you probably swap Villa and Brighton, something like that, right? You probably put Newcastle now, from my previous table, above Chelsea. Am I wrong?
I think you're right, and you're right just because they're a year ahead in the process. Chelsea still look like they're figuring it out. Newcastle have a different issue. We know what we're doing, but we're going to be exhausted.
Have they? So not only are they exhausted, which is what Liverpool exploited late on, right? I think Liverpool exploited 2 things. Newcastle weren't expecting Liverpool to then play in the way that they played, and Klopp and Pep are clearly weirdly prepared or kind of took the shackles off the players. And secondly, I think when you then look at the confidence of this Newcastle side, I also think on top of that, right, Eddie Howe, especially if you go back to last season, had there's a lot of very convincing results in there, right? There's also a lot of results towards the end of the season where you start to see that people have gone, we've worked this team out now. I'm not 100% sure that he's shifted enough and that he's got Tonali in the position he wants him to be in, that he's got Bruno Guimaraes in the position he wants. All these players aren't quite in the positions they want to be in order to dominate a game. And that worries me, mixed with these fixtures that some of them you kind of want to go, you don't just want to be like fighting someone off. You want to be like equal to them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I think they almost have the opposite problem in that way to Arsenal, who the criticism has been have transitioned too much and transitioned too quickly. And, they've messed things up with Kai Havertz and they've dropped Gabriel. With Newcastle, you look at it and go, have we developed enough? Especially given the fact that, if you think about AC Milan, Manchester City, PSG and Dortmund, and those aren't the league games, they are going to be...
That's going to be exhausting.
Exhausting. And the point is...
By the way, one of those obviously is the third round of the EFL Cup, so they probably could play a second string there. So here's the weird thing about that, right? They're then playing AC Milan, PSG and Dortmund. That is ick.
And given it's their first year in the Champions League, those will be emotionally engaging, absorbing, but exhausting games.
Pieces, yeah.
And if you look at the actual dates here, they have to go and host Man United after a trip to Paris.
Yeah.
They have to play Chelsea just before PSG. Can you imagine the conversation? Last year, they would have gone and played with unbelievable intensity against Chelsea.
Yeah.
Now they're going to be thinking, okay, but the big game is in Paris.
Yeah, and on top of that, I guess, there's the fact that it could go the other way, where you get an invigorating win and then you lose to PSG. Or you get an invigorating win against PSG, then you have to go against Manchester United. There's like all this kind of like, it's a very constant form of pressure. The very different expectation to being the underdog of the previous games, where it's just like, hey, when we score, it's like, what? What do we do that for?
And imagine trying to manage a squad where you have, within a little period of time, Arsenal, Dortmund, Chelsea, PSG, Man United, Goodison Park. You can see them getting hammered, candidly, at Everton and Spurs.
Can you see them getting hammered at Everton?
Yeah, because you can imagine Everton, they've just gone to Man United, they've just gone to Paris, and they're on their last legs. It's the Christmas run, and they're aware that in 3 days we've got to go to Tottenham. And they go there in survival mode. And then they've got Milan. So I fear for Newcastle here, if only because of the Champions League football.
I don't think, so I think if they go out the Champions League, the best thing that could happen to Newcastle is actually to not get into the Europa League.
I think the Europa League will pose essentially the same problem.
Because also, on top of that, the squad isn't big enough. So it's actually more about volume of games than it is even about difficulty with these.
And it's still their first time in Europe for a while. So even though the Europa League isn't as fashionable, a Europa League quarterfinal will have emotionally a similar effect to Dortmund.
Teams like Dortmund as well, I think Newcastle see themselves as very similar. I think what's going to be interesting is to see Dortmund's kind of cultural difference to Newcastle, where it's like, oh, we're owned by 51%, you're owned by, with all due respect, an investment group.
You can see the tifos ahead of time.
I'm just saying, I personally could never imagine that, but some other people could. So I'm basically saying Newcastle could finish 7th, but actually it could be as low as 9th or 10th.
And I don't think that's a problem as long as the side shows signs of developing, number one, and they have the Knights in the Champions League. I think if they go out with a whimper and the Premier League form suffers, you then start asking questions.
Liverpool's the final one. I predicted Liverpool in 4th. How wrong am I?
Maybe not very.
Oh wow, no, that's too fence city. Like is there, and I can't title the video this, but there's maybe a video coming at some point. A title post.
There you're wrong. There I can jump off the fence. There I can jump off the fence.
Why?
Liverpool are half-baked there in transition, but very good in their moments. So that sounds like half-assed, but that's where Liverpool are. They're half-baked.
Right.
So I think that Tottenham probably look, even though it's a brand new system, a little bit more like they know what they are, because the manager's very clear on what he knows what he is. Jurgen Klopp is having to adjust to a new kind of midfield and a new kind of football. Nunez is still a little bit of a question mark.
Cody Gakpo's been good in the international break, though. There's a lot of confidence within the side. There's kind of a few players who are sort of hitting their stride within it. Szoboszlai's good. McAllister's good. Endo's coming in. We don't quite know what that entity is yet. Havenberg. Oh,
I know, but the back four is deteriorating in real time.
Yeah, but everything deteriorates in real time.
It's very extensive.
Yeah. It's so everything is dying.
Well, that as it may be.
Yeah.
I think that Alexander-Arnold, who's been unbelievable, by the way, defensively the question hasn't been answered. Mm-hmm. The centre half problem, I still believe, is a problem, both in terms of Van Dijk and possibly in terms of one other centre half. I think Matip and Gomez are possibly just below the level. Mm-hmm. Robertson I am in love with romantically and as a footballer, and I find it difficult to criticise, but I think he is probably going to play a lot of games this season.
And it's probably towards the end of the run of your, like, once you start to break up each unit, so the midfield unit fell apart very quickly, the front unit slowly disintegrated, possibly even being disintegrated by January. The Mo Salah thing will come up again in January. That'll rumble for all of January, especially if there is an African Cup of Nations where you can go away and maybe be interviewed by certain people. I'm not sure.
I think Liverpool fourth is high. I think there are other sides, even Man United, who you've got third, which also looks high, by the way, if we haven't discussed it. Man United seem to have this way of just, through massive transfer spend, somehow accumulating enough points.
You're making the case here that you think Liverpool still finish below Manchester United, even based on the opening part of the season. The only way that I could conceive of that right now, based on the first 4 games of the season, which is kind of what this video is based on, but also is not, is if Højlund comes in and has a bigger impact on the team. Because I felt for those 20 minutes, he was very exciting, he was very energetic, he was very effusive.
Here's how I'd make the argument, essentially. Liverpool's midfield is an unknown. Their defence are deteriorating in real time. Somehow Man United are further along in the process. And I just have more confidence in Ten Hag to sort it out this season than I necessarily do in Liverpool to evolve into this wonderful beast.
It's pretty fascinating, because also when I go back to this Champions League group, if I double click that, right, I'm just going to zoom in on it actually. That Champions League group, look at that. That's a hard group, bro. It's not difficult, but it's not hard. It's not hard, but it's not difficult.
You know something?
None of that was English. Bayern Munich, Manchester United, a classic game. You're looking at, that's Tuchel versus Ten Hag. Copenhagen, Galatasaray is not pleasant.
Galatasaray is so unpleasant though that it's gone full circle for me. It's like
oh, can't wait to play there.
Well, it's like Kenilworth Road. Everyone's gonna be like, oof,
right.
Good luck there.
Yeah.
So therefore, yeah. But
9-1. Yeah.
I think what it says, I think United and Liverpool are both potentially high for you.
Wow.
I think if you're,
who do you think finishes above them then? Do you think Spurs are more likely to finish above Liverpool? Who's more likely to finish higher? Spurs are. And I don't mean that based on history. I mean can Ange do something?
Well, having this conversation with you has made me realise I think there's 2 sides, a little bit like last year, who are leaps and bounds ahead of the others.
Arsenal and City.
Yeah, because if you look at United, Liverpool, Chelsea, Newcastle, Spurs, Brighton, there are big flaws, or they're very transitional, one of the two. Whereas Arsenal and City are a little bit of a level above. So I would actually say 3, 4, 5, 6 is a little bit of a much of muchness.
I think what I have realised through looking at the opening fixtures of the season and also, fixtures, what I have realised is how strong the Premier League is this season. And, just the pure strength of those things. I get that I kind of want to go through some of these Tottenham. I just kind of want to say, I think Tottenham finish higher than there. I think Tottenham and Newcastle both swap maybe with Chelsea and Villa. I'm still unsure whether Tottenham finish ahead of Newcastle, and essentially Spurs are the Newcastle of this season, the actual darlings of the Premier League, where it's like they...
But they're somehow it's interesting because they're somehow the opposite as well. Newcastle settled but exhausted.
Right.
Tottenham transitional and no Champions League football. So it's kind of like they each have a strength and each have a weakness.
They've got a tricky couple of weeks. They've got the North London derby is going to be a massive one, followed by Liverpool.
Another North London derby, by the way, of sorts. We haven't
not nearly as meaningful, but
but if we have never had the 3 North London sides, we're now just waiting for Barnet and Enfield to join the party.
That's where we end the video. It's a shapely couple of weeks, I'm going to say, for Spurs. Spurs between now and October's pretty amazing, actually, isn't it? It's annoying, these international breaks, because that makes it look like, 7 weeks here?
Yes.
And it's actually more like 10 or 12. So over that time, obviously, Ange has a lot more time with the players, his ideas that aren't working quite yet with the fullbacks and all those other aspects. There's a couple of bits which work for Ange, a couple of bits that don't. He can just work those out of the team, and suddenly they're in great shape.
You know what's interesting, though, just looking at the table? There's almost 4 leagues in here to me.
Right.
There's the top 2, as you've predicted, albeit predicted in a fairly edgy way.
Middle 8? No, middle 7.
Then you have the good sides who aren't the top.
Sure.
So that's essentially United all the way down to Brighton. Then you have the sides who are pretty decent, and then you have the relegation fodder. So you sort of have this 4-league system.
4 tiers.
4 tiers, if you like.
I think I might have tiered it like that, my Premier League prediction thing. If I go back to my predictions, where am I? Look at what I've done. Season predictions. I have 4% on my battery left, by the way. Wait, watch. I have 1, 2. I think that was my 3, and then I've done 4.
Yeah. It's a different 4, but it's a fairly natural way to divide it.
Yeah.
You've heard
the way the Premier League works.
You've heard the phrase bottom 10, or bottom 11 recently, and it speaks to the strength of the Premier League. We feel like we can't just go top 4. We feel like we need to make allowances for Chelsea, Villa, Newcastle, Spurs.
Let us know what you think in the comments below. What is it that you think in particular we got wrong? I got wrong. What is it that you think in particular we've maybe not reflected on correctly? Where were my predictions incorrect or correct? And we will see you guys again real soon right here on the Laurence McKenna channel. Peace.
Cool, mate. I enjoyed that.
That was good, wasn't it?